BTS in crisis. Jungkook breaks down moments before Jimin collapses and is rushed to the hospital. The staff's shocking testimony changes everything. "Don't touch him." Jungkook's voice cracked like glass against steel, echoing through the backstage hallway as his fist slammed into the concrete wall. The sickening thud vibrated through the bones of everyone within earshot. Jimin lay motionless on the cold floor, his body curled like a question mark, and blood smeared across the side of his temple as a pool of silence devoured the chaos. Jungkook's knuckles dripped red, not from the wall, from before, from something no one could fully understand yet. From something he wasn't ready to admit. The security team hesitated, frozen between fear and duty, uncertain whether they should restrain Jungkook or assist him. Taehyung stood in the corner, breathless, his hand over his mouth, eyes wide and glassy, unable to form words. Hoseok had already bolted to the emergency panel to call for medical backup, his voice sharp and trembling. Namjoon's voice barked orders somewhere behind them, but it was drowned in the static hum of adrenaline. Jungkook knelt beside Jimin now, chest heaving, sweat glistening under the backstage spotlights that were never meant to be this harsh. "Hyung, wake up, please." His hands hovered above Jimin's shoulder but didn't touch, afraid his skin might be made of glass. "I didn't mean," the words caught in his throat, choking on their own implications. He blinked rapidly, vision swimming as the air thickened with guilt and iron. The night had started like any other, thousands of screaming fans, bright lights, rehearsed steps, shared glances across the stage. But there had been something off in Jimin's smile, a stiffness, a delay, the way he winced when turning left. Jungkook had noticed. He always noticed, but he said nothing. Until backstage, until the confrontation, until Jimin finally said something that broke whatever was holding Jungkook together. "I saw the file, Jungkook. I know what you're hiding." That sentence echoed in Jungkook's skull like a detonation. He hadn't expected Jimin to dig. Not into that. Not into the incident from 2 months ago. Not into the night Jungkook disappeared after the Tokyo press conference and returned looking like he'd seen a ghost. Jimin had connected dots he wasn't supposed to connect, and Jungkook had reacted not with violence, but with a wave of emotion so overpowering it had collapsed his judgment. A chair thrown, a light shattered, words shouted that could never be pulled back, and then Jimin's fall, the crack of bone against metal scaffolding, the scream that never came. The paramedics stormed in like thunder, pushing Jungkook back with soft force and firm purpose. He stumbled, dazed, wiping his face with the back of his hand, leaving a smear of red beneath his eye that wasn't his. The hallway filled with barking orders, beeping machines, the scent of antiseptic, and the fatting cologne that clung to Jimin's jacket. "Was it a seizure?" one staff member whispered. "No, it was something else." He hit his head. "Did Jungkook?" No, he didn't touch him. It wasn't like that. He just lost control." Seokjin arrived too late to the scene. His eyes flicked from Jimin's body to Jungkook's trembling frame, then to the broken light overhead. He didn't speak, just turned slowly and walked away, jaw clenched, expression unreadable. Jungkook felt it like a sentence passed. As the stretcher rolled away with Jimin's fragile body strapped in place, an IV already pumping into his arm, Jungkook took a step forward but Namjoon blocked him. His leader didn't say a word, just met his gaze and shook his head once. "Not now, not like this." The ambulance door slammed, sirens erupted. And suddenly silence. Jungkook sat alone on the dressing room floor 20 minutes later, still in costume, hands raw and shaking. He stared at the broken mirror across from him, at the reflection of someone he didn't recognize. Someone whose eyes were full of guilt and terror. Someone who had let his fears grow so loud they drowned out reason. The file, the Tokyo incident, the phone call he wasn't supposed to answer, the name on the screen that no one else knew, the reason he'd been spiraling for weeks. Jimin had found it, or part of it, and now Jimin was unconscious, in a hospital, because Jungkook didn't have the courage to tell the truth when he had the chance. He closed his eyes and saw Jimin's face, pale and twisted in pain. The way he'd whispered, "I forgive you," as the world around him dimmed. Had he really said that, or was Jungkook imagining it to survive? The knock on the door was soft but sharp. "Jungkook," came Taehyung's voice, hoarse and uncertain. "They want to talk to you." "Who?" "The staff, the managers, HYBE." Of course they did. Jungkook stood, his body heavy, his soul heavier. The hallway outside the dressing room was filled with silence that screamed. Everyone avoided his gaze except for one of the younger stylists who whispered, "It wasn't your fault," but sounded like she didn't believe it herself. In the meeting room, faces were drawn and stiff. The company's legal team was already present. Someone had leaked part of the incident online, just audio muffled but real. A snippet of Jungkook's voice screaming, Jimin's name, a crash. HYBE wanted control. They wanted answers. They wanted a clean narrative. Jungkook had none to give. "I need to go to the hospital," he muttered. "Not yet," came the reply. "There's media outside and police." He sat down slowly, eyes flicking toward a single folder on the table marked confidential, his name on the front, and a second one underneath. "Park Jimin, ICU." Outside, a storm had begun. Rain lashed against the windows like claws. Somewhere cameras flashed. Somewhere the truth was sharpening its teeth. And Jungkook, for the first time in his life, felt truly afraid. Not of the scandal, not of the headlines, but of losing someone he hadn't yet found the courage to be honest with. Someone who had risked everything to uncover a truth Jungkook had buried out of fear, shame, and something darker. He buried his face in his hands as the staff began to speak. "We need to know everything that happened. I swear to God, if anyone leaks another second of that audio, I will burn this place down." Yoongi's voice cut through the silence like a blade as the conference room erupted in murmurs and tension. He wasn't shouting, but the edge in his tone was more terrifying than rage. The room full of managers, PR handlers, and internal security froze. Jungkook sat with his fists clenched so tightly on his lap the bones screamed under his skin. He hadn't said a word in over 30 minutes. The only sound was the hum of the projector playing CCTV footage in slow motion. From backstage, from seconds before Jimin collapsed, it showed nothing violent, nothing damning, but it also showed everything. The energy, the screams, the chaos, the devastation in Jungkook's eyes, the unspoken trauma bleeding out through posture and silence. Namjoon stood now, jaw tight, eyes darting between executives. "This ends here. No more leaks, no more speculation, no more silence. We talk and we fix this before the media devours him alive." "We can't stop what's already circulating," one staff member muttered. Yoongi leaned forward. "Then we drown it with the truth, all of it." Jungkook finally spoke. "What if the truth ruins everything?" Silence. Taehyung, who had been standing near the window all this time, turned slowly, his voice low and breaking. "You're worried about ruining everything. Jimin is in a coma, Jungkook." The words landed like gunfire. "No," Jungkook whispered. "He's stable, the doctors said." "He's unconscious, he hasn't moved in 12 hours and you're sitting here acting like you're the one we need to protect." Taehyung's voice cracked. "Do you know what he said to me before the show? If anything happens, I want you to protect him. He's drowning, T. He's just too proud to say it." Jungkook couldn't breathe. Hoseok reached across the table, placing a hand gently on Jungkook's. "We need to understand, Kook. Not for the company, not even for the public, for him." The room held its breath. Jungkook stared at his reflection in the glass of the water bottle. His face looked alien, tired, haunted. Finally, he spoke. "I saw her again, in Tokyo." Everyone froze. No one asked who her was, because they all remembered. The girl from 5 years ago, the trainee who vanished overnight, the rumors, the whispers, the scandal HYBE buried before it ever reached the surface. The one Jimin had asked about a year ago, and Jungkook had shut him down with a silence so violent it ended their conversation for weeks. She was pregnant, Jungkook said. The words sounded like they didn't belong to him. I found out during the press tour. She came to the hotel, said the baby was gone, said it was mine, said she wasn't going to stay quiet anymore. Why didn't you tell us? Namjoon asked, his voice low but not accusing. Jungkook laughed bitterly. Because it wasn't true, she forged everything. The photos, the test results. It was blackmail, but for 10 hours I believed it. I wanted to run into traffic. I was alone in Tokyo, and the only person I wanted to call was Jimin, but what? Jin finally spoke. But I'd already lied to him. About her, about everything, about what happened years ago. Taehyung looked like he'd seen a ghost. That night after the awards show. Jungkook nodded. Yoongi leaned back, arms crossed. So, you lost control because Jimin found out the truth. No, Jungkook said, eyes burning. I lost control because he told me he forgave me before I even confessed. He looked at me with those eyes and said he understood, and that broke me more than the lie. A heavy pause settled across the table. Namjoon turned to the staff. We need to get ahead of this. Issue a holding statement. No names, no accusations. Just acknowledge the incident and request privacy. Then we get Jungkook to the hospital. He needs to see him. We can't risk it, the head of PR replied. There are fans camped outside, cameras everywhere. If they see him walk into that hospital. I don't care, Jungkook said, standing up. Let them see me. Let them see everything. That afternoon, chaos swallowed the hospital entrance as dozens of reporters flooded the curb, cameras flashing like strobe lights. Jungkook walked through it like a man condemned, surrounded by guards, flanked by Yoongi and Namjoon, but untouchable in his silence. Inside the ICU, the world shrank to a heartbeat monitor and a pale face that hadn't moved in too long. Jungkook sat beside Jimin and took his hand. It was cold. You idiot, he whispered, tears finally breaking. Why did you try to save me when I was the one killing myself? There was no answer. Hours passed. Jin sat on the windowsill watching the rain. Taehyung paced. Hoseok hadn't stopped praying. And then at exactly 3:47 a.m., Jimin's fingers twitched. Every eye turned. Nurses rushed in, machines beeped, lights flashed. And Jungkook, hand trembling, held on tighter. Haeyoung, he whispered, voice cracking open. Jimin's eyes didn't open, but a single tear slid from the corner of his eye. He had heard him. He was fighting his way back. And somewhere deep in that sterile hospital room filled with grief, secrets, and unfinished sentences, something began to heal. The first thing Jungkook heard was arguing, raw and unfiltered, voices colliding just outside the ICU room like fists against glass, and he knew before he even turned his head that nothing was going to be quiet again. You promised me there would be no press, Taehyung snapped, his voice shaking with a fury that felt barely contained. They're downstairs. They know he's here. They didn't need an invitation, Yoongi shot back, arms crossed, eyes dark. Someone inside talked, again. Jungkook stayed seated beside Jimin's bed, fingers wrapped around Jimin's hand like an anchor, his eyes fixed on the slow rise and fall of Jimin's chest as if looking away might make it stop. The door swung open harder than necessary and Namjoon stepped in, his face drawn, exhaustion lining every feature. We have a problem, he said, not looking at Jungkook at first. No, Jungkook replied hoarsely, finally lifting his head. We have 1,000 problems, pick one. Namjoon exhaled. The audio leak wasn't the worst of it. There's video now, not of the fall, of before. Jungkook's stomach dropped. Before what? Before the fight, Namjoon said carefully. Before Jimin collapsed, it shows you shouting, it shows him pushing back. It shows enough to make people choose sides. Taehyung let out a bitter laugh, as if they needed more reasons to tear him apart. Jungkook stood up so abruptly the chair scraped loudly against the floor, drawing a sharp look from a nurse through the glass. Let them see it, he said, voice rising. Let them see everything. I'm done hiding. You say that now, Yoongi replied coldly, but you don't get to decide how this affects him. He nodded toward Jimin, still unconscious, monitors blinking steadily. Every word you say becomes his burden too. Jungkook's voice cracked. Then tell me what I'm supposed to do. Sit here quietly while they rewrite who we are, while they turn him into a victim and me into a monster. Hoseok stepped forward, eyes wet but fierce. You already think you're a monster, that's the problem. You don't see how much he believes in you. Jungkook shook his head, laughter bubbling up in disbelief. Believed, past tense. As if summoned by the tension itself, Jimin's breathing changed, shallow at first, then sharper, and a soft alarm chirped. Everyone froze. Nurses rushed in, adjusting lines, murmuring instructions, while Jungkook was gently but firmly guided back. He's waking up, one nurse said. But stimulation needs to be limited. No, Jungkook said, stepping forward again. He needs to hear me. The nurse hesitated, then nodded once. Jungkook leaned close, his voice trembling. Jimin, Hyung, it's me. Jimin's eyelids fluttered, a faint crease forming between his brows like he was fighting through fog. His lips parted. Stop yelling, he whispered, barely audible. Taehyung let out a strangled sound that was half laugh, half sob. Jungkook swallowed hard. I'm sorry, he said, the words pouring out faster now. I'm sorry I didn't tell you. I'm sorry I let it get this far. I'm sorry I scared you. Jimin's eyes opened just enough to meet Jungkook's. Even weak, even broken, there was clarity there. You didn't scare me, he murmured. You scared yourself. Silence fell heavy around them. They're fighting outside, Jimin continued faintly. I can hear it, Jungkook nodded. They always fight. A ghost of a smile touched Jimin's lips. You're still here. I'm not going anywhere, Jungkook said fiercely. Not this time. Jimin's fingers tightened weakly around Jungkook's hand. Then don't lie anymore, he whispered. Not to them, not to me, not to yourself. Jungkook felt something inside him crack open, raw and terrifying and freeing all at once. Outside the room, phones buzzed nonstop as headlines multiplied, narratives sharpened, and blame spread like wildfire. But inside, for one suspended moment, there was only truth hanging between two people who had almost lost each other. Jungkook leaned down, forehead resting against the edge of the bed, and for the first time since Tokyo, since the lie, since the fear, he cried without holding back, knowing that when Jimin fully woke up, nothing would ever be the same again. What do you mean the board is calling an emergency meeting? Namjoon's voice echoed through the hallway, sharp with disbelief as he paced near the hospital's private wing entrance. The overhead fluorescent lights gave his skin a sterile hue, and the shadows under his eyes made him look 10 years older. Since when does HYBE's executive board care enough to interfere with our personal lives? They care now, said Minseo, the company's chief legal liaison, barely keeping the tension out of her voice. Especially when the top trending hashtags globally include Jungkook attack, protect Jimin, and HYBE new. Inside the ICU room, Jungkook was gripping Jimin's hand again like it was the only thing holding him together. His thumb traced slow circles over the bruised knuckles of Jimin's hand, his breathing shallow, jaw tight. Jimin had drifted in and out of consciousness all night, his mind fogged by medication, but every time his eyes opened, they searched the room for one thing. You're still here, Jimin mumbled, voice like shredded silk. I told you, Jungkook said, leaning closer. I'm not going anywhere. You look like shit, Jimin said weakly. Jungkook laughed, and it broke something in both of them. The door slammed open. Jungkook, you need to come with me now, Minseo barked. Jungkook didn't move. I'm not leaving him. Now. Taehyung appeared behind her, expression unreadable, but his eyes betrayed something close to panic. They're saying you knew everything, Kook, about the girl, about Tokyo, about Jimin's condition. They're saying you snapped. Jungkook finally rose, slow and heavy. Of course I snapped, he said. I was falling apart. I just didn't know how loud it would be when I broke. You have to go clear your name, Taehyung said, and this time there was pleading in his voice. They're going to spin this until none of us survive it. As Jungkook walked toward the exit, Jimin's hand slipped from his. A chill went through him. In the high-rise HYBE executive boardroom, 12 men and women sat like statues. The windows behind them framed the gray Seoul skyline like a tombstone. No one smiled. No one welcomed him. He was instructed to sit in the center of the room, alone, under a single spotlight. "We've reviewed the footage," one of the board members said flatly. "There's enough to suggest a violent outburst that endangered another artist's life." Jungkook didn't flinch. "I never touched him." "But you endangered him, with the environment you created, with your silence, with your secrets." "I tried to protect him," Jungkook said, his voice rising. "I thought I was protecting all of us." The chairman leaned forward. "Did you or did you not keep information about an alleged blackmail attempt and a fabricated pregnancy hidden from this agency for over 2 months?" "I did." "Why?" "Because I didn't know what was true, because I didn't want it to be true, because I couldn't even face myself." A murmur rolled across the table. "Jimin nearly died," the chairman continued. "Your emotional instability has now become a threat to the brand integrity of BTS as a whole." "I don't give a shit about the brand," Jungkook snapped, standing now, fists clenched. "I care about Jimin. I care about what this does to him when he wakes up and realizes the world thinks he's the victim of something I never did." Mincio tried to step in, but was silenced by a hand gesture from the board. "Would you be willing to issue a full public statement?" someone asked. "One that includes an apology and an admission of negligence." "No," Jungkook said, voice low and final. "Because I wasn't negligent, I was human. And if you want to silence me, you'll have to take away everything, because I won't lie again. Not about this." Back at the hospital, Jimin woke up fully for the first time. His body still ached, but his mind was clearer. The first face he saw was Taehyung, sitting by his bed, jaw clenched. "Where is he?" Jimin asked. "They're trying to bury him," Taehyung said bitterly. "Why?" "Because he told the truth, and the truth doesn't make good headlines." Jimin's eyes darkened. "Get my phone." "You can't be serious." "Now." Jimin, still weak but fueled by something burning inside him, recorded a single voice note. No video, just words. "This is Park Jimin. I am speaking of my own will. I was not attacked. I was not abused. Jungkook did not harm me. If anything, he saved me. Not from a fall, but from breaking under the weight of everything we weren't allowed to say. And if you turn him into a villain, then you'll have to turn me into one too." Taehyung stared at him. "Post it," Jimin said. Taehyung did. Within minutes, it was trending. Within hours, it shattered the narrative the media had been building. Jungkook was called back in by the board. "Do you deny this was coordinated with you?" the chairman demanded. "I haven't spoken to him since this morning," Jungkook said. "Then how do you explain this reversal?" Jungkook stood tall. "Because the truth always finds its way out, even when you try to kill it." Yoongi burst into the room seconds later, his phone in hand, showing a clip of a new leak. Not from Jungkook, not from the staff, but from an anonymous insider. It showed security camera footage from 2 days before Jimin's collapse. The girl from Tokyo, at a BTS rehearsal building, talking to a HYBE manager. "I think we just found out who's really behind the leaks," Yoongi said, eyes blazing. And in that moment, everything turned. Not toward safety, but toward war. Because secrets weren't just Jungkook anymore. They belonged to HYBE. And Jimin wasn't the only one who had been in danger. "You think I didn't know?" Seokjin's voice sliced through the tense air of the makeshift war room they had set up in the hotel near the hospital. He had remained mostly silent throughout the storm, but now his composure was gone, replaced with rage that twisted his expression into something unrecognizable. "I saw her, Jungkook, weeks ago, talking to that manager Hwang-yi, the one who always shows up when scandals need cleaning. I asked questions. They told me to shut up, said it was nothing. Said I was imagining things." Jungkook stood frozen back against the wall, eyes wide as the others turned to him. Taehyung sat stiffly, arms crossed so tightly they trembled. Hoseok looked like he had stopped breathing. Yoongi paced near the window, thumb pressed hard against his temple. Namjoon's hands were locked together in front of his mouth, hiding his expression but not the fury boiling just beneath it. "You should have told us," Seokjin hissed. "But now I understand why you didn't, because you were too busy trying to protect all of us while they were planning to destroy you." "I didn't know she'd come back," Jungkook said quietly, voice raw and hollow. "I thought what happened 5 years ago was buried. HYBE swore it was over, they promised." "HYBE promises a lot," Yoongi muttered, then buries people in non-disclosure agreements in silence. Jungkook looked up, eyes burning. "She was just a trainee. She was vulnerable. I made a mistake back then and they erased her like she was dirt. They made me believe I ruined her life, that the only way to save the group was to pretend she never existed." "And now she's back," Namjoon said finally, "but not for justice, for blood." "She wants revenge," Taehyung added, voice low, "and she's using Jimin to get it." Hoseok broke his silence. "What do we do? If the footage leaks more, if the media spins it again, Jimin could be blamed too. People are already twisting his voice message, saying HYBE forced him to say it." "They didn't," Jungkook growled, "and we're not letting them." A phone buzzed. Minseo entered, face pale. "There's more." "What now?" Namjoon asked sharply. "She just gave an exclusive interview to a major outlet. It airs in 2 hours. "What did she say?" Jungkook asked, his voice dangerously calm. Minseo hesitated. "That she had a relationship with you, that it ended when she became pregnant, that you begged her to abort, that you sent people after her to keep her quiet, that you threatened her." "No," Jungkook said instantly. "That's a lie, all of it. She says she has proof. She forged it before, why wouldn't she again?" "Because this time she doesn't need to prove anything," Minseo replied darkly. "She just needs to make people believe it's possible. That's how this works." The room fell into an uneasy silence, the kind that comes before something irreversible. Jungkook turned to the group. "I want to go on record." Taehyung stood up. "You're not going alone." "You shouldn't even be speaking publicly," Minseo warned. "Let us handle it legally." "No," Jungkook said. "She went public, she used her name, now I use mine." They arranged a live stream, raw and unfiltered. No scripts, no PR, just Jungkook sitting in a dark room, a single camera, and a silence so thick it strangled the air. When it went live, the internet exploded. "I'm Jungkook," he began, "and I want to speak without anyone editing what I say." He took a breath. 5 years ago, I had a relationship with someone I met during training. It wasn't appropriate. I was young, reckless, and convinced that everything I touched would last forever. I broke that illusion and I broke her. I didn't mean to, but I didn't stop it either. He paused. She got hurt, and instead of protecting her, I stayed quiet, because I was told silence would save us, that it would keep BTS safe, that it would keep the dream alive. He leaned forward. "I regret that silence every day." He looked into the camera, raw. "But I did not threaten her. I did not send people to hurt her. I did not force anything. She left and I was told to forget. I tried, until Tokyo, when she came back, not with truth but with vengeance. She said she lost a child that was never mine. She said she would destroy me if I didn't give her money. I refused. She leaked footage. She twisted facts. And Jimin got caught in the crossfire." He stopped. "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm asking you to stop hurting people who had nothing to do with my sins." He stood. "And if HYBE tries to silence this message, know this. I recorded this on my own. No management, no lawyers, just me. And if they take me down, they better take me fully, because I won't be quiet anymore." The stream ended. Within seconds, it was the most shared video on the internet. 50 million views. Then 100. Hashtags changed. From Jungkook attack to Jungkook truth. But in the HYBE offices, The reaction was not applause. It was war. Minseo got a call. She answered, then turned to the group with a face drained of color. They're going to suspend you, Jungkook, effective immediately, pending internal investigation. Taehyung stood. You're joking. They're saying the live stream violated your contract. You spoke without permission. Let them, Jungkook said. You don't understand, she whispered. They're considering dissolving BTS, for good. Yoongi stood up like thunder. They wouldn't dare. They might. Outside, fans gathered in the thousands, chanting his name. But inside, HYBE's boardroom was already writing a new story. And in a hidden office on the top floor, the girl from Tokyo was smiling. Because she hadn't just broken Jungkook. She had made him dangerous. And now the real war was only beginning. The broadcast hadn't even ended when chaos erupted in every corner of HYBE headquarters. Executives were screaming into phones. Legal teams scrambled to prepare damage control. The PR department was in full meltdown. But in the middle of it all, standing like a storm that refused to pass, was Kim Namjoon. You suspend Jungkook. You dismantle the foundation of BTS, he said, voice low, deadly calm, facing the board with eyes that no longer pleaded but warned. The chairman stood. We didn't approve the live stream. He didn't ask for approval, Namjoon said, because you lost the right to be gatekeepers the second you let her back in. Across the city, a very different storm was brewing. The girl Minna, now no longer hidden behind whispers, sat in a luxurious interview chair on national television. Her makeup flawless, expression composed, her voice soft as she recounted a twisted, calculated version of the truth. Cameras captured every well-timed tear. The public ate it up, but not everyone. Back in the hospital, Jimin sat up in his bed for the first time in days. The doctors weren't thrilled, but he didn't care. He held his phone with trembling hands as he watched the live broadcast of Minna's interview. Every lie felt like a scalpel reopening wounds that hadn't begun to heal. Taehyung entered without knocking. You shouldn't be watching this. She's rewriting my pain, Jimin said without looking at him. She's rewriting all of ours. Jimin turned, eyes sharp. No, she's trying to erase Jungkook. She's weaponizing every part of his past and twisting it into something he never was. Taehyung swallowed hard. Then we fight. Jimin raised an eyebrow. We go public, all of us. You think the company will let that happen? Taehyung smiled grimly. They can't stop 7 voices at once. Later that night, the remaining members gathered in Jimin's hospital room. The weight in the air was palpable. Hoseok had barely spoken since the suspension news. Yoongi looked like he hadn't slept in days. Jin was already packing, furious and helpless. Namjoon stood at the door, unreadable. We do it together, Taehyung said. One statement, one truth, no filter. I'm in, Jimin said instantly. We'll be risking everything, Namjoon said slowly. Contracts, brand deals, even legal retaliation. Jin stopped packing. We were never about contracts, we were about each other. Yoongi nodded. We don't protect the company, we protect the truth. They turned to Hoseok. He looked at them all, then exhaled. I'll write the damn thing myself. The joint statement was handwritten by Hoseok, refined by Namjoon, and read aloud by Jimin on a live stream the next morning. BTS was built on trust, Jimin began, eyes unwavering. Trust in each other, trust with you, our fans, and we will not sit silently while that trust is manipulated and turned against one of our own. He continued, voice gaining strength. Jungkook did not assault anyone. He did not threaten anyone. He was attacked, emotionally and psychologically, by someone who has spent years building a lie. We've all made mistakes. We've all been human. But what is happening now is not about mistakes. It's about revenge, and it's hurting innocent people. At that moment, each member stepped into frame behind him, shoulder to shoulder. Namjoon spoke next. HYBE has failed us. In their pursuit of silence, they abandoned protection. We're speaking now, not just for Jungkook, but for every trainee, every idol, every voice that has been buried under a corporation's fear of scandal. And then Yoongi finished it. We are not breaking up, we are breaking free. The internet exploded. Global media outlets were paralyzed. HYBE stocks plummeted in the first hour. Sponsors began calling. But the fans lit the world on fire. The #stand with BTS became the most used tag in social media history within a single day. Celebrities tweeted support. Artists shared their own stories of silence and control. But inside HYBE, the real storm began to shake loose secrets no one expected. An anonymous whistleblower released documents, internal memos, NDAs, even email threads, confirming that HYBE had known about Minna's attempts to blackmail Jungkook long before Tokyo, that they had monitored her, even paid hush money, that she had been protected, not to shield her, but to protect the company's reputation. In one chilling email, an executive wrote, "If we bury her story, we bury Jungkook's sins with it." But he hadn't sinned. He had broken. And they had fed on his guilt. Jungkook watched it all unfold from a small rooftop, far from the noise. He didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He just breathed for the first time in weeks. A call came in. He answered without checking. "You did it," Jimin's voice came through, weak but clear. "We did it," Jungkook said. "I'm proud of you," Jimin whispered. There was a pause. "She's not done," Jimin added. "She's going to come back harder." "I know." "Then we fight together." Jungkook didn't say anything at first. Then quietly, "I'm not afraid anymore." And for the first time, he meant it. The rain poured in sheets over Seoul, hammering against the windows of HYBE headquarters as if the sky itself had turned against them. Inside the top-floor executive lounge, the walls were thicker than stone, but even there the thunder could be felt. Chairman Bae stood at the window, hands behind his back, unmoving, watching the city descend into a storm of rebellion and truth. Behind him, silence reigned, until his phone vibrated once on the glass table beside the whiskey decanter. He didn't look. He already knew what it was. Another leak. Another file. Another nail in the coffin they'd sealed themselves in when they tried to silence the one voice that refused to die, Jungkook. "They're threatening to walk," came the voice of Director Seo, packing slowly near the fireplace. Not just BTS, the entire next generation of artists. Rookie groups, solo acts, even production teams are whispering about strikes. They're calling it a creative revolt. He paused. "You were right. Jungkook is more dangerous unchained than we ever expected." Chairman Bae's voice was barely a breath. "Then we should have buried him deeper." Unbeknownst to them, across the city, Jungkook sat at the kitchen table of a small studio apartment, far from the cameras, far from the microphones, but not far from the truth. In front of him sat a printed transcript, not from an interview, not from a court hearing, but from a security recording, one that no one was supposed to have. The voice was unmistakable. "Minaz. I don't care what happens to him," she said, her tone cold and calm. "He had the world, he threw it away, he should pay for that." Then another voice. A male voice. "A Chuang Yi. I've already arranged it. The Tokyo reappearance was phase 1. The pregnancy lie, the files, the message chain, all fabricated. I want him isolated, broken, suspended. You promised me that," she snapped. "You'll get your revenge," he assured her. HYBE doesn't protect idols, they protect investments. He stopped being one the moment he got emotional. Jungkook didn't blink as he reached for his phone and hit call. Yoongi picked up after one ring. "Tell me it's done." "It's more than done," Jungkook said, his voice low. "I have a recording." Yoongi swore under his breath. "We go public." "Not yet, we go strategic." Meanwhile, Taehyung entered the hospital room again, this time carrying a laptop, eyes blazing. "You need to see this," he said to Jimin. Jimin looked up from the book he hadn't really been reading. "What now?" Taehyung opened the screen and played the clip. Mina in a dark interview set speaking clearly. "Jungkook manipulated me. I was scared of him. I wanted to leave, but he threatened my career. I had no choice." Jimin's jaw tensed. "She's flipping the story." "She's weaponizing your silence again," Taehyung growled. "The more you don't speak, the more she paints you as complicit." "I'm tired of being careful," Jimin said, closing the book and sitting up straighter. "She wants war, fine." They contacted Namjoon, Hoseok, and Seokjin. The plan was laid out in whispers and coded messages, not through HYBE's lines, never again through their system. This had to be done outside, raw, real, and louder than anything the boardroom could erase. That night, Jungkook arrived at the underground podcast studio known only to a handful of artists in Seoul. Independent, unfiltered, and globally streamed, the host didn't ask questions, they just handed over the mic. Jungkook stared into the camera, steady. "You've heard her voice, now hear mine." He played the recording. Every word, every calculated threat, every manipulation. Then when silence fell, he spoke again. "She said I threw the world away. Maybe I did, but I'd rather lose everything than keep living a lie." The episode aired at midnight. By sunrise, the internet was in full collapse. Mina's face was plastered across headlines now, no longer as a victim, but as a mastermind. Netizens dissected every frame of her interview, every contradiction. Investigative journalists began digging. Former HYBE trainees came forward anonymously, sharing eerily similar stories of manipulation, cover-ups, and strategic smear campaigns. And still, HYBE said nothing. Until the unexpected happened. Chairman Bae called a press conference. All cameras, all microphones, no filter. He stepped up to the podium, adjusted the mic and said, "Jungkook was right." The room exploded with flashes and noise. He continued, "We made decisions out of fear, out of greed, and in doing so we betrayed not only our artists, but the trust of an entire generation. I am stepping down effective immediately. A full investigation into HYBE's practices will begin today, led by a third party." Reporters shouted over each other, but one voice asked the question no one expected. "Do you think BTS will forgive you?" Chairman Bae paused. "I don't know," he said softly, "but I no longer expect them to." That same day, Jimin posted a photo, him and Jungkook, side by side on the hospital bed, hands clasped, eyes fierce. The caption was just 3 words. "We're still here." It became the new anthem, the new chant, the new banner across protests, murals, concerts. It was no longer about just one lie, one woman, one betrayal. It was about reclamation, of identity, of voice, of truth. That night, as the storm finally began to lift over Seoul, Jungkook stood outside the hospital under the clearing sky. Jimin joined him, wrapped in a blanket, eyes soft. "She lost," Jimin said. Jungkook nodded, but not just her. Jimin looked at him. "You lost something too, didn't you?" "I lost the version of myself who stayed quiet to protect others." "Good," Jimin said, leaning on him. "That version never deserved you." Jungkook didn't speak for a moment. Then quietly, "Thank you for believing in me." "I never stopped." And under the silence of a city that had screamed for weeks, under the weight of a truth that had nearly destroyed them, they stood still. 2 people who had survived the fire not by running from it, but by walking through it together. "Why wasn't this brought up before?" The reporter's voice was cold, pointed, her pen poised like a weapon. "Why did none of you speak when the lies were spreading like wildfire? Why did Jungkook have to break alone?" Yoongi leaned into the microphone, his expression unreadable, his voice calm but sharp. Because sometimes silence isn't weakness, sometimes it's survival, and sometimes it's watching someone you love walk through fire so they can come back stronger. The press conference wasn't planned, it wasn't even allowed, but it happened anyway, hosted in a reclaimed theater on the outskirts of Seoul, lit by stage lights instead of corporate spotlights, guarded by fans instead of security. Every member sat on that stage, side by side, for the first time in weeks. No teleprompters, no curated answers, no filtered truths. Namjoon adjusted his mic, his eyes locking with the reporters. We didn't speak sooner because we were scared, not of the truth, but of what this industry does to truth when it doesn't fit their brand. Another voice from the crowd. What do you say to those who still believe Minna? Seokjin didn't hesitate. Belief is a choice, and if after everything you still choose lies, you were never really with us. Backstage, Jungkook stood behind the curtain watching them speak. His hands trembled not with fear but with something heavier, something almost holy. He walked alone for so long that hearing their voices beside his felt surreal, but part of him still couldn't step into the light. Not yet. Go, Jimin whispered, appearing beside him, a quiet strength in his voice. This stage is yours too. Jungkook nodded, then stepped out slowly, the audience erupting the moment they saw him. But he didn't wave. He didn't smile. He sat down between Jimin and Taehyung and leaned into the mic. Do you believe me now? He asked the crowd, eyes scanning every camera, every journalist, every soul in that room. No one responded. He smiled bitterly. You believed I was dangerous, that I was cruel, that I was hiding a child, silencing a woman, breaking my own brothers. You believed it because it was easier than accepting the truth. He looked directly into the front row where Minna's lawyer sat, stone-faced. The truth is, I was drowning, and everyone watched, not because they didn't care, but because they didn't want to see what it looked like when a golden boy breaks. Another question flew from the crowd. Are you pressing charges? Jungkook's gaze sharpened. No. A murmur. You're not, the reporter echoed. I'm not pressing charges, Jungkook repeated. Because this isn't about vengeance, it's about exposure. If the justice system wants to go after her, they will. But I will not let her define me any longer, not in court, not in headlines, not in the shadows of who I used to be. More murmurs, more whispers. Taehyung took the mic. But we will be filing formal complaints against HYBE's leadership for negligence, for manipulation, for enabling the smear campaign, and we're not the only ones. Jimin continued. Trainees, staff, managers, dozens have already reached out anonymously. Some are willing to speak publicly. This doesn't end with us. Namjoon finished the thought. And it doesn't stop until the entire system is held accountable. The room exploded in flashes again, cameras clicking like machine guns. But the members didn't flinch. They'd become immune to the sound of media warfare. Hours later, back at the dorm they hadn't shared in years, silence reigned again, but it was different now. Comforting, familiar. The air didn't feel like pressure anymore. It felt like oxygen. Jungkook sat alone on the rooftop, hood up, knees drawn to his chest, watching the skyline. Taehyung joined him without speaking, passing him a can of coffee, the kind they used to drink after long rehearsals. I thought I lost all of you, Jungkook said quietly. Taehyung sipped his own coffee. You didn't lose us, you just stopped looking. A pause, then Jungkook laughed softly. Do you remember that night in Busan, when we said we'd stay together no matter what? Yeah, Taehyung said. We said even if the world turned on us, we wouldn't turn on each other. Jungkook looked over, eyes glinting with emotion. I almost did. But you didn't, Taehyung said, and that's why we're still here. Inside, Jimin was staring at the messages pouring in, hundreds of thousands. Survivors, fans, artists, people who had once believed the lie and now begged for forgiveness. People who stood with them, really stood with them. He handed the phone to Yoongi. Read this, Jimin said. Yoongi frowned, then read aloud. I was in the trainee program in 2018. I left because of what they did to me, what they covered up. Your story saved me. Thank you, Jungkook. Hosuk wiped at his eyes silently. Seokjin broke the silence. We need to do something. Yoongi looked up. Like what? A concert, Seokjin said. Not for the media, not for profit, for truth. Namjoon straightened. A live performance, no filters, no sets, just us. Taehyung grinned. We call it The Reckoning. Jimin's eyes lit up. No guest list, no hierarchy, just voices, our voices. Jungkook finally walked in, hair damp from the mist outside. Count me in. And in that moment the world shifted again, not because they had survived, but because they were about to rise, louder than ever, with a message no corporation could script. This wasn't redemption, this was revolution. The warehouse was massive, cold, and unpolished, nothing like the glittering concert arenas BTS had once called home. There were no branded banners, no corporate logos, no rows of VIP seating. Just concrete floors, raw steel beams, and a stage that looked like it had been built overnight by hands that cared more about truth than perfection. It was everything HYBE would never approve. And that was the point. Jungkook stood center stage in the dim light, staring at the empty space that in 24 hours would be filled with people who weren't coming for a spectacle. They were coming for reckoning. They're going to try to shut it down, Yoongi said behind him. His voice quieter than usual, laced with something unspoken. HYBE filed for an injunction this morning, claiming it violates your contract. Jungkook didn't turn. They can try. Namjoon stepped up on stage beside them. We already found a legal loophole. This is a private art performance with voluntary attendance, not a concert, not a brand event. They can't touch it. Seokjin joined them with a phone in hand. You should see this. He held it out to show a video clip circulating online, Minna packing out of a hotel lobby, chased by dozens of reporters. Her expression was unhinged, her voice raised as she screamed at the cameras to back off. The headline below read, Exclusive, HYBE source confirms leaked tapes were authentic. It's unraveling, Jin said. She's losing control. She never had it, Taehyung said from the side, adjusting a mic stand. She only had fear, ours. Jimin arrived last, still pale but stronger now, his movements more certain. He walked toward Jungkook with slow, deliberate steps, then pulled him into a hug without a word. It was a moment of silence that said more than any interview ever could. They didn't rehearse. They didn't choreograph. Instead, they built the set list like a confession, each song chosen for what it meant in the story they were ready to tell. Not the story HYBE had printed, not the one the media regurgitated. Their story, their survival. When the doors opened the next night, fans flooded in by the thousands. Word of mouth had done what no marketing campaign could. They came wearing black, holding candles, not light sticks. Some had signs with lyrics. Others simply held photographs, and all of them carried the same look in their eyes, a kind of collective grief that was finally ready to burn into something new. The lights dimmed. No fireworks, no countdown. Just silence. Then Jungkook stepped into the light. He didn't sing at first. He just spoke. My name is Jungkook, he said, voice echoing through the space. And I almost lost everything. Not because I did something wrong, but because I let others define my silence. He looked out at the sea of faces. This is for those who were silenced. This is for those who broke and still kept walking. This is for us. The music began, Black Swan first, but stripped to piano and strings. The lyrics hit differently now. Every word felt like a confession, every note like a wound being reopened and healed in the same breath. Jimin's voice cracked mid-verse, but no one cared. It made it real. Taehyung's eyes filled as he harmonized, but he never looked away from the crowd. Yoongi rapped like he was bleeding truth. Hosuk danced like his body was mourning and fighting at once. Namjoon spoke between songs, reading excerpts from their personal journals, including the entry he wrote the night Jungkook was suspended. His voice wavered as he read. "I saw the light leave his eyes and I stood still. That's on me. I let fear paralyze me. No more." They performed unreleased tracks, written during the worst days. One was Jungkook's titled Glass, a song about the moment he saw Jimin unconscious on the floor, about the guilt that gnawed at him, about the lies he told himself to survive. The room held its breath as he sang it, and when he finished he didn't bow. He just looked up, eyes shining, and whispered, "I'm still here." The encore was unexpected, not planned, not prepared. Yoongi stepped up and said, "We wrote something last night together. It's not polished, but neither are we." It was raw. It was angry. It was beautiful. The lyrics hit like gunshots. "I'm not your brand. I'm not your shield. I'm the fire you tried to hide. Now I burn without your field." By the end, the audience wasn't clapping. They were crying, reaching, healing. As the crowd began to chant their names one by one, something shifted again. Not in the media, not in the industry, but in them. Because for the first time they were standing not as idols, products, but as people who had survived something unspeakable and chose not to bury it. Backstage, Jungkook collapsed onto a chair, breathing hard, chest heaving. Jimin knelt in front of him. "You did it." "No," Jungkook said, "we did." There was a knock at the door. It wasn't security, it wasn't staff. It was a man in a gray suit, holding a folder marked confidential. "I represent 3 other artists under HYBE, he said. "They want to speak. They want to tell their stories. They said they're not afraid anymore because of you." Jungkook stared at him, then slowly stood. "Then let's make sure no one ever has to be afraid again." The city didn't sleep that night. Neither did the internet. The performance, now referred to across social media as The Reckoning, was already being dissected in real time by analysts, commentators, artists, and fans. The rawness of it was its power. No backing tracks, no filters, no handlers pulling the strings. Just 7 men who had survived a system built to devour them. Inside a quiet room at an undisclosed location, Jungkook sat at the end of a long table surrounded by unfamiliar faces. 3 artists sat opposite him, 2 men, 1 woman, all visibly shaken, eyes darting toward the door every few minutes as if expecting someone to barge in and drag them out. "Are you sure this isn't being recorded?" one of them asked nervously. "It's safe," Jungkook said, his voice steady. "There are no HYBE ears here, just us." The woman leaned forward. "We saw the footage. We watched everything. We thought if someone as big as you couldn't fight them, what chance did we have?" "You're not alone anymore," Jungkook replied. "They're weaker than they look. They're scared now." The other man, barely 20, spoke up. "They told me if I said anything about the executive producer, I'd be blacklisted, that no one would ever sign me again." "Did he?" Jungkook began, but the man cut him off with a nod. "He locked the studio door. I never went back." Jungkook swallowed hard. His chest tightened, rage surging under his skin. "I'll help you tell your story," he said. "Not through press, not through PR, through us." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "They made me sign an NDA. They gave me pills after my breakdown and told me if I went to a hospital, I'd be cut." "You're going to be heard," Jungkook said, "all of you." Back at the dorm, the rest of BTS gathered around the television as the special report began airing. A breaking news banner scrolled across the bottom of the screen. HYBE internal files leaked. Expose REVEALS systemic trainee abuse cover-up. Yoongi didn't move, arms folded, jaw tight. "It's starting." Namjoon's eyes stayed glued to the screen. Too late to turn back now. The report was brutal. It laid everything bare: emails, confidential memos, payout records. It showed years of silence complaints, shredded evaluations and threats issued to young artists who dared speak up. Several whistleblowers gave anonymous testimonies. Their voices trembled, digitally masked, but their stories cut through the distortion like blades. We were told to smile when our ribs were broken. They said, "You'll never be another BTS, so shut up and dance." They didn't want stars, they wanted puppets. And then came the final blow. An intercepted memo from Hwang Yi himself. "If Jungkook breaks, they all fall, let him." Jin stood up from the couch, packing. "That's it, that's the bullet." Taehyung turned, fuming. They used his pain as a blueprint. Jimin's fists were clenched so tightly his fingernails dug into his palms. They thought his silence was weakness, but it was strength, the kind that's about to bury them. The following day, protest lines formed outside HYBE headquarters. Not violent, not chaotic, just quiet rows of people, fans, former staff, former trainees, holding signs that read, "I am not your product and no more silence." Cameras documented every moment. Global media picked it up. The pressure intensified. Stocks crashed. Endorsements were pulled. Collaborations were suspended. Inside the boardroom, Chairman Bay's replacement, a woman named Director Cha, brought in as part of a transparency reform called an emergency assembly. But this time, the seats weren't only filled with executives. The 7 members of BTS entered through the side door, no longer guests in their own house. Director Cha stood as they approached. "We're not here to be polite," Namjoon said. "Or to negotiate," Seokjin added. Yoongi stepped forward, a USB drive in his hand. "Here's everything. Every statement, every file, every voice we've collected from the victims your company tried to erase." Director Cha took it wordlessly. "This isn't a request," Jungkook said. "We're demanding full cooperation with the investigation, no interference, no settlements, full justice." "You're putting everything on the line," Director Cha said quietly. "No," Jungkook replied. "We already did, now it's your turn." Later that evening, Jungkook visited the hospital again. Not for Jimin, who had finally been discharged, but for someone else. In the private room at the end of the hallway sat the girl he thought he'd never see again. Minna. Her lawyers had withdrawn. Her sponsorship deals had vanished. Her fame had dissolved. And now, sitting in a paper-thin gown, her makeup smeared, she looked nothing like the storm that had nearly destroyed him. "I expected you to gloat," she said without looking up. "I didn't come for revenge," Jungkook said, standing by the door. "Then why are you here?" "To understand." Minna laughed bitterly. "There's nothing left to understand. I lied, I broke you. I thought if I burned your world, mine wouldn't feel so small anymore." Jungkook said nothing for a long time. Then finally, "You could have asked for help." "No one ever helped me," she spat. "You never gave them the chance." She looked up at him, tears suddenly pooling in her eyes. "I hated that you still had them, even after everything. They never left you. No one ever stayed for me." Jungkook stepped closer. "Then let this end here. Don't let your pain become someone else's curse again." She looked away. He turned and walked out without another word. Outside the hospital, the city had changed, not fixed, not healed, but awake. And in the silence of the night, as Jungkook stepped into the waiting car where the others were already seated, he realized something. This wasn't just the end of a scandal. It was the end of an era. An era where they bowed in silence to survive. Now they stood tall, not because they won, but because they refused to stay broken. This wasn't just survival. This was resurrection.